Mark Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair, and want to thank the Minister and the Chair for taking a call. I know I'm not supposed to refer back to the last part, but it was useful to have those reassurances, and I do think it would be good as we go through the remaining parts of this bill if we could have that continuing dialogue. I'm not wholly convinced, I have to say, by the Minister's answer, but at least we got one. Part 2 of the bill is a relatively simple part, Mr Chair, but it's one I think that members of the public will be very interested in, because this is the bit where we set the tax rates. The rate of tax that New Zealanders actually pay in a given year, and these are the annual rates for the 2015-16 year. It wasn't a subject of massive debate when the budget came before the House, because the government didn't propose to make any significant changes to those tax rates, but they are a matter of significant public interest for two reasons. One historical and one looking to the future, and that's what I want to talk about in this call. So the tax rates as prescribed in Part 2 of the bill are those imposed by Section BB1 of the Income Tax 2007, and they must be paid at the basic rates specified in the schedule of that Act. What those rates are, which I'm sure most New Zealanders know, is that from $0 to $14,000, your marginal tax rate will be 10.5%. From $14,000 to $48,000, it's 17.5%. From $48,000 to $70,000, it's 30%, and from $70,000 upwards, Mr Chair, it is 33%. And it's on that point that I want to note, because each year, as the House comes to this particular clause or this particular part in a bill, it's the bit where we remember what happened in 2010. When we remember that a national government faced with an economy coming out of the global financial crisis, still in it in terms of the effect on most businesses, made the remarkable decision that the best thing they could do with the resources of the government was to give tax cuts that benefited the highest income earners. That was the best thing that the National Party could come up with, was a set of tax cuts. 40% of the benefit, 43% of the benefit of those tax cuts went to the top 10% of earners. That's the effect of those tax cuts. The effect of those tax cuts was to widen inequality in New Zealand. The Child Poverty Action Group have a wonderful graph, and it actually shows that inequality in New Zealand started to reduce once Working for Families was brought in. And it continued to reduce until we get to the point of these very tax cuts, and it clicks back up again. So that was the effect of the tax changes, enshrined now in what we're doing in Part 2 of this bill, because, Mr Chair, Part 2 of this bill reaffirms that decision. It reaffirms the decision taken by this government to say, we think the wealthiest of New Zealanders need a break. We're not so concerned about those on low and middle income. They can make do for themselves, but if we give that tax break to the wealthiest New Zealanders, it'll trickle down. It's never changed, Mr Speaker, the National Party's view that that wealth will eventually trickle down. Well, it hasn't happened. It has not happened. And then rather than come back to this House in this piece of legislation, as they could be doing in Part 2, and actually Part 2 would be much longer, Mr Chair, if they had, because Part 2 would prescribe new rates for Schedule 1 of the Income Tax Act. But it doesn't, because those rates aren't changing, because this government is prepared to let inequality grow. And if we look to the future, Mr Chair, as I said I would do, we now have the prospect that we will have a longer Part 2 in the version of this bill that will come before the House in a couple of years' time, because the tax cut carrot is being dangled out again by Bill English, the Finance Minister, only just a couple of weeks ago. He's dangling out tax cuts as the economy slows down. We hear this morning unemployment's gone up to 6%. There's 11,000 fewer people in work. There's 151,000 New Zealanders unemployed. And what could the government do? Invest in the regions, support research and development, support diversification of the economy. But no, they want to dangle out tax cuts again, no doubt again weighted to the wealthy. They want to dangle out a change to the equivalent to the provision in the Income Tax Act that Part 2 of this bill amends, because that's their real goal. Reduce that heavy, heavy burden on the top income earners in the vain hope that somehow that'll trickle down to hard-working, ordinary New Zealanders who go to work each week and pay the taxes in the middle bands that are here in Part 2 of this bill and don't feel themselves getting ahead. They haven't been given a break by this government. This government doesn't care about them. They only care about those people at the high end. Part 2 of this bill entrenches that.
Clayton